Simon, here's what I want to talk about.
Yeah, what was your thing?
Okay. Talk to me about Angine de Poitrine.
Ah,
Yeah,
Angine de Poitrine.
Hit it.
So French for chest pains,
Right.
which
Yeah.
I already love. Yeah. So very strange two-person band from Quebec, deep in French Canada, who make the most incredible and also strangest music I think I've ever heard in my life. And it's incredible because it's two guys, one of whom's on drums and one of whom is playing a double-necked bass and guitar, but they're microtonal. So it has twice as many frets as both of them are microtonal. And he is barefoot, covered in body paint and a weird polka dot outfit, just like his compatriot. They're wearing giant paper mache heads, and he plays perfect, and I mean time signature perfect rhythms on both instruments, records them live, and then loops them. But all of the drums are live, which means all of it has to be like flawlessly executed in order for him to be recording and looping, which he does with his feet.
It's
Because
crazy.
he's barefoot recording loops of himself.
Right.
So this band like exploded at a couple of festivals recently.
I
And
must
has
go see
become-
a show. I must.
It's hard. They just announced their first ever tour, and everything sold out immediately. Like I think they had one DC show. I'm the kind where like once the show's that crazy, I'm no longer want to go because I don't like people enough to be in that kind of a crowd.
So here's why I bring this up. Not only because it's viral in the kind of very online sense, and it is incredible. It is avant-garde, like it's classic core straight bullseye avant-garde, and I love that stuff, especially in the age of artificial intelligence tools. So AI and various tools are allowing for novel content creation, music included, right? And so I think that this is a project that is definitively like poking that thing in the eye, and that humans are still going to be coming up with the truly creative, new kind of vanguard type stuff in the creative space. I think it's almost think it's important.
It's so aggressively unreplicatable.
Totally. That's exactly what I mean. There's no
entity, human or otherwise, could possibly have come up with this combination of people who, I mean, this is music with no words. The songs are like, a minute and a half, 2 minutes. Anytime they make any noises with their mouths, it's like gibberish nonsense meant to sound like alien speak. They don't talk during the sets. It doesn't make any sense. And it should not be as good as it is. Like, none of the things on paper make me think like, oh, I want to listen to this.
But it's successful because it's pushing those boundaries. And
yeah, it's such a breath of fresh air.
It's like again, we keep talking about punk on the show. It's punk avant-garde type stuff. I'm not saying it is squarely that punk thing that you're very familiar with, but I'm just saying like it is
firmly countercultural.
Very.
And that's what I'm like most interested in at this like phase of my life is like, people that are carving out their own spaces. And it's also, I mean, this is going to sound very blasé, I think, but there is a similar, not identical, but a similar ethos that runs through folks that want to start their own companies and be like, yeah, I mean, I could do defense work for X, Y, or Z, but I could go invent it for myself and just like do it my own way. The downside is I could feel that this is where you were going, but my counterpoint to that is even amongst us who are doing the startup thing in the tech space, I'd say maybe a fourth of us are actually interesting. And so many folks,
I think that's generous.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously like a financial incentive, and people go into this kind of work for financial incentives, and I get that. But for me, and for a lot of the folks that are at our company that I like working with, I'm here because I enjoy hanging out with the people here.
Yeah,
and like that is the only reason.
Yeah,
full stop.
Yeah,
that I came to this like ecosystem of stuff is because I found folks that felt like appropriately shaped misfits. And anything less than that, I would have stayed in big law, stayed in the government. I had plenty of fun and success there. But yeah, I agree. There is a kindred spiritness to it.
Right. So I think I'm going to start referencing this sometimes in the course of our conversations and maybe out in the market. But with that, Welcome to the Goat Rodeo podcast, everybody. I'm Garrett Smith, your regular host, and I'm joined by regular co-host Dave Caudle and Simon Coon. The three of us are from Reveal Technology, and we talk about everything on a weekly basis, talk about everything between geopolitics, defense technology, venture capital, industry, and everything in between. I would go as far as to say that our company Reveal is the Angine de Poitrine of the defense startup ecosystem. And if you don't know who that is, I feel sorry for you. If you end up looking it up and you like it, great. If you don't like it, great. It's pushing the boundaries, and hopefully we as a company are doing the same thing. This week we are very happy to welcome a fourth wheel co-host, retired U.S. Army General Ross Coffman, late of U.S. Army Futures Command, where he served as a deputy, but that was just at the tail end of a prolific 35-year military career that started in the early days of conflict in the early 90s, and really his career featured in every step along the way for all the major conflicts and all the major transition points over a multi-decade career, and we're grateful to have him in the mix. General Coffman, welcome to the podcast. Would you mind maybe saying hey to everybody, introduce whatever gaps I left, of which there are so many in your intro, and we're eager to get into it with you with a few interesting topics.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I started in the Army right out of college and found myself in Desert Storm. I thought I'd do a couple years, and then, like you, Simon, I fell in love with the people and the common mission and the purpose, and I never looked back. And so for 26 years, I was either fighting or training to fight everywhere from Iraq, Haiti, Bosnia, Iraq. Spent some time in Germany late, really kind of all over the world, but mainly Kona space. And then I was in Poland. I got a phone call from General Officer Branch. I was a 1-star with the 1st Infantry Division at the time, and they said, "You're moving to Detroit." And I was like, "Oh, stuff's about to go down in Detroit." So gonna be yeah, there's gonna be a conflict, and they said, "No, you're gonna go build all the new vehicles for our army." And I was like, I did not want to do it. It's that I wanted to stay in divisional units, maintain focus. And I said, I'm not an engineer. And worse than that, I'm a liberal arts guy. So if you want to know about the Iliad or the Odyssey, call me up. But I can't do anything with vehicle development. I said, no, genius. You're not going to do anything with engineering. You're going to tell the engineers what to do based on your experience. So for 4 years, I got the equivalent of a PhD in metallurgy and megajoules on impact and vehicle development and putting together complex systems and robots. And then from there, I went to Austin, Texas, and took over the whole portfolio from vaccines to satellites. It just staring at deep tech every day. And then once I retired, I realized the Army gave me the greatest gift it ever could, because I had a skill set that most did not, right? I knew how to fight, and I knew how to apply technology solutions and work with the government. And other than that, I mean, what people should probably know that I'm an enthusiastic but terrible golfer.
I'm a middling golfer with low enthusiasm, so I think you've got me beat. At least you're having fun out there.
The other thing, when Simon's talking about people, it's like Costco. I love Costco. Hate the people, right?
Ooh, interesting.
Love the band, hate the people.
Right? I feel the opposite. As a solo with no family, I go into Costco just to see the people, see what kind of weird stuff they're up to.
That's why I go to Walmart. I go to Walmart.
I have no reason to buy, a pallet of already cooked, thinly sliced beef, because I couldn't eat it all at once. But
or 20 gallons of sunflower oil. I'm with you.
Exactly. But I'll walk around and see, people sprinting for stuff. I'm like, yeah, this rocks. I don't know what's going on here, but it's cool.
General, I think you originate in Kentucky. Is that right?
Yeah, my dad was in the Army. He was a tanker. My grandfather was a tanker.
Okay.
And so we would go to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and my dad would do a troop assignment, come back to Fort Knox, back and forth. So I call Kentucky home. Went to every level of school there through college, kind of half of middle school, come back, go somewhere else. And always thought I'd retire in Florida. My kids told me, we don't want to live in Florida. We'll live in Austin, Texas. I was like, well, I'm planting the flag here. So yeah, now I'm here in Austin, Texas, never leaving. And I
Bad.
great place.
Austin's a great city. I think we're going to get into this later in the discussion. You're a third, am I right? Third generation armor officer. You're a third generation tanker by deep
That's
background.
awesome.
Yeah, which is pretty amazing. The U.S. Marine Corps shed in the course of its Force Design 2030 efforts shed the tank as a capability, and I think we'll tee this up later for conversation. But welcome to the mix, and hopefully this Barstool Sports for Defense Tech agrees with our rambly style, agrees with your interest in engaging a few hoodlums in conversation. But I do want to head nod at the now balance achieved amongst Army and Marine representation on the podcast. So thank you for joining. Dave's happy. He's
still a little officer heavy, but it's okay.
Mustang over here. It's 2-2. Simon, come on.
It's 3/4 credit at best, but it might actually be a negative. Switching sides.
Okay, got it. Okay, great.
I'm a fire team leader at heart that walked into the wrong office.
You are. Yeah, every lieutenant colonel thinks they're a fire team leader at heart. That's the worst thing you could possibly say. I will never forget my platoon commander showing up to an NCO run, and the platoon sergeant would be like, "You have lost your mind."
You should
right
leave,
to his
sir.
face. They're like, "Hey,
you should leave.
You're
sir.
a Mustang, but you are not welcome at this run." It's not how that works.
Plus, officers often don't want to know what's happening down there because that makes them liable.
We can't say the weird jokes that we say when sir's around. You got to go away, sir.
Well,
Come on.
And NCOs will get the impossible done. Like someone will say, Sergeant Major will say, "I want every evaluation fit rep report for the next 6 months on my desk by tomorrow morning." They'll get like 3/4 of them. I mean, it's like they can just.
And getting the impossible done requires somewhat adherence to the rules and regulations of the United States military. And so you can't look behind that curtain. You just got to let it, the work is done. Good.
You don't want to.
Next.
Don't want to.
Okay, well, let's. I'm sure we'll tease out plenty more of this deep culture set out of Simon and team through the course of the conversation. But in relevant geopolitical news, the U.S. and Iran failed. I'm going to put that in scare quotes. Failed in the negotiation process mediated in and by Pakistan, and as a result, the United States has now imposed a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz to assert control essentially over that piece of critical choke point terrain and sea lane. And this is to directly challenge Iran's de facto veto on commerce going through the shipping lanes there. Without getting into kind of the details of that specific maneuver, I actually really want to talk about what comes next. And my sense is that anything could happen. There's a deep sense of uncertainty, which is why much of the kind of big mass media is running to the extreme interpretations of what could happen next. And from one side, you hear that the war is going great. From the other side, well, maybe we can't even call it a war, depending on which side you're talking about. This series of events is either going really great or it's going really poorly, and it's either really great for the world and the United States, or it's not at all good for anybody, and certainly not the United States. But I don't want to wade into that quagmire. I actually want to talk about if something really goes south and we have to, exert more force into that geography, into that region. And I'm looking at the two Army officers here on the line because I think they would, their communities and their experience would inform exactly how this would happen. But my question, here's the open question: are we adequately prepared for that? In other words, if we put ground forces into contested terrain in and around the Strait of Hormuz or into the Iranian mainland, are we prepared for that? Let's leave the politics aside, right? Like, obviously, the American population has very little appetite, given the last 20, 25 years of global war on terror and these so-called kind of endless wars, that that is a politically unpalatable thing. But let's leave all of that aside and talk about just capability. Are we adequately prepared to go and operate for long periods of time on the Iranian mainland or in the region? Dave, it looks like you're prepping a quick hit response.
I was going to say, I have strong opinions here, but I think I'm going to let Ross go first, given that he's got a Wikipedia page. on, on, on how to fight and win our nation's wars. So
yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Go ahead, Ross.
Okay, so putting aside the thousands of casualties that would occur.
Exactly. That's,
let's just talk about what this is. It's not a matter of if we are prepared tactically or operationally for this. It's, are we prepared logistically? And that is my major concern. So when you start talking magazine depth of the United States in the region, it has to give you pause. The rest of the war that has been going on in Ukraine is really a global war anyway. Much of the Europeans' dry powder has been spent on Ukraine. So the availability of logistical munitions to sustain a long-term ground warfare, and it would be a long-term ground warfare. Once you get in it, it's really hard to get out. It's not when I say logistics or sustainment, it's not the sustainers or the logisticians. It's just the magazine depth, getting fuel, getting all classes of supply to that point for stay. We can absolutely do it. We have the capability. We're the best in the world logistically at fighting through the sustainment challenges. But we're going to have to really ramp up our production of munitions, vehicles, repair parts. And so it will take a arsenal of democracy type movement to make this happen. So yes, but
General, can I rewind just slightly? You're indicating right off the bat that we would need to accept the fact that there would be many thousands of casualties, and I'm assuming you're talking about American side casualties. Do you think that's because that's the unchangeable nature of war, or is that because we're not technologically prepared, and so the survivability challenge for ground troops and ground forces is less sure than maybe it would have been in other contexts?
I am 100% convinced that no matter where we fight in the future, the number of casualties will be so staggering on both sides based on the technological advancements we have and the type of weapons that our adversaries would use. So this is kind of a one-sided war when you start talking technology, except drone warfare with the Iranians. Really good at that. And counter drone. Now imagine if this was a near peer competitor that has all the missiles, all the EW, everything that we have. The results will be horrific long term. And I think what we're seeing with Iran is similar to also the Ukrainian conflict, where innovation is, or necessity is the mother of innovation. And so their long range fires are not $2 million ballistic missiles. They're cheap drones. They're cyber hacks on our utilities and other places. They're using the tools that they have at hand to fight this war, and the sympathetic parties around the world to Iran's plight are unbound by any treaty negotiation whatsoever. So it's a concern. Would we go in there and would we accomplish our stated missions? I think so. I think that I have ultimate confidence in the fighting women and men of this country. But we got to get it strategically right and have our eyes wide open logistically before we make any hard
I do think you're right to cite the asymmetry that would immediately come to the forefront, especially in counter-drone warfare. And that's an area where I think we in the West recognize we are deeply unprepared for survivability against a mass, low-cost drone threat. And drones are, I think, simply the technological advancement beyond the IEDs of the global war on terror period in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is, where many of our American and coalition casualties came from. This is just kind of a beefed up version of that asymmetry, which would absolutely manifest itself. Dave, what do you think? Are we prepared? Yay, nay, other?
Yeah, first off, I fundamentally agree with Ross on logistics. It's also got some unique challenges in Iran. But first off, for the maneuver components, there are some things we can do. There are some things I think we can and should be doing to reduce that casualty count. But the core problem, I agree, it's signature management. It's gotten really hard to hide your ground forces and your ground maneuver. Like I think the top of the list for modernization for me is like how do we manage our detectable signature for the adversary? We are too easily sensed. We are too easily struck by everything on the battlefield. And then playing into that, to your point, counter UAS layered defense at scale is probably how we're going to reduce the casualty count for the ground maneuver elements. And we need both of those things. We've never really needed both of those things. I mean, to some extent, for the logistics tail. And Iran creates a and Ross is talking strategic on the more tactical level. Like Iran's hard. It's hard to create a logistics posture there. Like it's going to be really hard to get our stuff in there. Mountains, limited routes that are predictable to get our stuff in there. Potentially contested air for air bridges. And I haven't seen a ton of new like capability for hardening our logistics chain. So they're susceptible to all those same things the ground maneuver is, which is sensing the detectable signature and striking them. It's going to be hard both for the ground maneuver and for the logistics chain support.
When we're talking about deployment of significant ground forces into a region like this, we're talking something well beyond the Marine Expeditionary Unit construct that's in zone and the quick hit 82nd Airborne Joint Forcible Entry capability. We're talking about deploying main infantry and mechanized and armored echelons into a contested terrain. What does that mean from a technological readiness or an ability to force project in this kind of geography?
I think, establishing a lodgement and expanding that lodgement, the Marines and the 82nd can establish lodgement, but expanding that lodgement is going to require something that can move fast, that's protected, and then you can start establishing your logistics base, right? So I would assume that if that decision was made, which for the record, I love talking about this, but I think the chances of us getting into a ground war in Iran are very low. I don't.
I agree.
Yeah, I think we very quickly defaulted to this assumption of not only a ground war, but a ground war in Iran, which I think really muddies the question of being technically ready, right? We have picked a specific scenario, an unlikely one, but a specific scenario that comes with like certain baggage associated with it, right? Like, is the U.S. technologically ready for an industrial scale ground war? Does it take place in our hemisphere? Does it take place in someone else's hemisphere? Does it take place on our own mainland? Those are three very different versions of technologically ready. Also, three very different versions of political will, because I think there is a certain, and I felt the same way during the IED fight and during the GWAT, there's a certain level of ingenuity that is like inherent in populations that are fighting existential fights. And we have not unleashed that in the American space probably since World War II, right? You look at the speed with which we come up with solutions to problems, not only faster because we were oriented differently as an industrial base, but faster because we had to. There was no option. We were committed and it was all in, and we haven't been all uh, in a very long time. And so when I think about these questions and I think about are we ready technologically to match up with Iran, we smoke Iran technologically in pretty much every single category. And the things that we're worried about, if you were to resource a colonel on the ground and be like, hey, you got to figure it out, we're all in, I bet you he comes up with some pretty interesting solutions that his troops come up with in order to defend their lives. And Dave, you and I, you've gone down this rabbit hole, and I've come much closer to your thinking over the last year of a lot of the innovation that like really matters on the battlefield is going to happen down there closer to that tactical edge, and figuring out how to like resource and authorize those combatant those actual like warfighting commanders is where the real secret sauce is. Because I don't think we'll ever build a better mousetrap in advance of that existential threat.
I'll take the win, Simon. But to your to your point, then let's go a little less specific. Then okay, in the case of sustained ground conflict in Iran, and look at it holistically. Like, are we prepared for the next conflict in general, regardless of what it looks like? I've got um, a topic in mind because Ross specifically is on the call. So let's go less specific. So Ross, you come from, I think you said you were a third generation tanker. And you've managed a portfolio of armored systems. And so I was a light infantryman. We've got 2 Marines on the call. They divested of tanks years ago. I'm gonna ask you, even though it may become contentious, in your mind, are tanks becoming obsolete? And if not, what do you see as the role of like the armor main battle tank in the next conflict in general?
So this is a long-standing debate discussion. It's fun, right? I mean, I think that, and it's obviously relevant today. When I was first joining the Army and picking my brand, I said, Dad, I'm a little worried about these Sager missiles. Like, they say to take a tank out, and he said, 7.62 goes through your field jacket, right? Like, there is no safe place on the future battlefield. Like you said, Dave, I mean, you're detectable and reachable. But when you need a tank, you really need it. Like, what's going to replace the mobile protective firepower of a 120 millimeter smoothbore cannon or sniper rifle that you need to reach out and touch somebody? I mean, artillery's not going to do it. Drones don't do it when it's windy. Like, this is an all-weather solution, and we can say that we don't need tanks in the future. Okay, well, what's going to replace that? And I'm fine with it. Tell me what it is, and I'm fine with it. I'm not parochial in that sense, but there is nothing. Like, you got the all-weather matters, and so then it's, well, you can't look at it in isolation. So do I need tankers? Yeah, but I need artillery, and I need infantry, and I need aviation, and it's combined arms. And so that specific role has to be filled. And, they're weak on the top and they're weak on the bottom. That's what tanks have in common. So we beefed up the bottom for IEDs, and now we're looking for ways to take care of the drone threat.
Hold on, a couple of snippets. I understand that the current generation of Abrams main battle tank is something like 73 tons. This is not something I knew off the top of my head. This is a Google Gemini informed research project that I'm now reading as it unfolds in real time. But that is an outrageous weight. That's a very heavy capability. And so what I'm understanding is that the Army are now unveiling a program or project called the M1E3 Abrams, which is a re-engineered capability that takes us into the future. And that just happened in the last few months. There was a kind of a public unveiling of the project.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, hit us.
That was my program.
There you go. Amazing. Okay.
I started that effort in Detroit.
Okay, good. Yeah.
The idea is you have to lightweight it. You got to get the crew, below the 1 meter line. So if you went back and looked at all tanks battles across history, the U.S. has never, that we know of, lost a main battle tank with a bullet hitting 1 meter from the ground or below. So let's get the humans into that space. Now let's lighten up the turret so that we can move fast. We need to improve what the propulsion system is, so you can go further on a tank of gas, or you have some battery power to give you, silent watch, etc. So all these things are being done, and the Army, I should have been fired, right? I mean, like, we don't have a tank program. They told me. I said, well, there's this one tank we built. So we built a prototype, and now it's the number one priority for the United States Army is replacing the main battle tank.
When you downweight a capability like that, but you're also tracking the asymmetric, call it low cost, attritable kamikaze or one-way attack adversary drone capabilities, there has to be some kind of additional thought around survivability. So it's not sounds like a downsizing of armor, but it's maybe more active or proactive counter drone capabilities, or how does that feature?
Yeah, you have to, when you're designing a new vehicle or capability for the military, you have to look at all of the known and threats, and where you have to make a leap, and where will the technology go in the future for China and Russia. Right, those are the pacing threats. And yeah, so the United States Army is eyes wide open on the drone threat, and the capability will exist, I am confident, to protect, soldiers on the ground, soldiers in tanks, or on the battlefield.
So, Ross, a version of potentially protecting those soldiers. So the Air Force has had this conflict going for a while too. Should we not on fighters, specifically manned fighters? So we see the Air Force investing in, okay, there's a manned fighter jet, but now we're going to invest in CCAs, in collaborative combat aircraft. So there might be one fighter pilot, but then there's 10 or 30 unmanned systems. And it looks like from our outsider perspective, it looks like the Army is still meaningfully investing in optionally manned combat vehicles and armored vehicles. You have any insight there?
Yeah, I ran that program too, and all the robotics program and the autonomy program. So ground autonomy is really hard. You hear the argument, well, we could fly a drone from Nevada and take out targets in Afghanistan. Yeah, there's a latency. Latency is not a problem, and the air is consistent. Or as long as the sea states remain calm, the water's generally consistent, right? But the ground is so dynamic, and you have lidars and other computer vision, that it's just tough. And so when you start talking about, now we want to maneuver, right? It takes you, each one of us, it took 7 to 10 years to really master maneuver. You knew it, you were, okay, so, a new sergeant or a new lieutenant can kind of rope through it, but to really understand the microterrain and how that impacts you, et cetera, that you all know, it takes a long time. Getting autonomy to that level where you're just going to let things go ethically, right? That's the key, is we're an ethical force. So our adversaries will just let the robots go and kill anything they see. We have to have a human in the loop. So that's the why. But really what we're trying to do with the optionally manned component of the Bradley replacement is offload cognitive responsibility from the crew. So now it can drive itself while I'm targeting, communicating, reporting, etc. And so that's kind of the purpose of it.
So here's my thought. As we have this conversation about are tanks relevant in X or Y next fight, my brain immediately jumps to the Bradley and the Bradley in Ukraine. A vehicle which we are divesting of, right? Or have divested of. I don't keep as much track of Army vehicles as I probably should, given what we do for a living. But I know that clearly it was dated.
Simon, hold on. Weren't you a key Senate defense appropriator? How did you miss that one? Allegedly.
Other things, Sentinel. But anyway, but I did see, like everybody else, the 300 Bradleys that we sent to Ukraine, which you don't see much reporting on anymore. But for a time, it really was like the darling of Western aid to Ukraine, was these vehicles for a number of different reasons. Speed, had some interesting stuff sitting on it that allowed them to respond to drones, to see T-90s from a distance, stuff like that. And I think that really feeds into that same conversation around, you're going to take what you have on hand and you're going to figure out how to use it in a way that you hadn't thought of before, because you have to. And I think there's this very defeatist existentialism of oh, well, we don't have the thing that beats that drone, so we're going to lose. I'm like, what fantasy world do you think we lay down and give up because the first thing in the arsenal didn't work? We're going to find something else. We're going to put something else together. And that doesn't solve the preparedness question, but it feels way more draconian when we're having these conversations than it needs to be, because we're sitting on an extraordinary amount of capability for an extraordinary amount of situations. We're in a much better position than I think people give us credit for.
Yeah, I
Ross,
mean,
there's a
pass. I mean, every war we've ever fought, we kind of got punched in the face first,
Yeah.
and then the Army and the Marine Corps coming out of World War II looked very different and had very different capability. Sorry, I cut you off, Garrett.
No, but
No,
you're
you
right.
didn't.
Iran only has to fight in Iran. America has to prepare for every possible theater that we could go to. And it's like a very different preparedness problem set to be like any climb in place, maybe 2 wars. See what I did there?
I almost jumped in
Versus
and said that myself, though. Thank you for doing that. Thank you.
versus I only have the ability to defend my small corner of the world and maybe power project through some terrorists. But we have a whole different challenge in front of us.
Ross, there's this popular notion of the defense industrial base needing to be re-energized through, call it the venture capital ecosystem, or leveraging best-in-class commercial technologies, or the innovation ecosystem outside of traditional legacy channels for defense contracting and procurement and all of that. What was your experience in the kind of the tail end of your career now that you're firmly in what the Marine Corps always calls the first Civ Div, the first civilian division? What's your experience now with the private sector being responsive to emerging requirements, or kind of the contributing from this kind of re-energized defense industrial base? What's your perspective on how the private sector is engaged on these problems? Apply it to tanks, apply it to whatever you'd like.
Yeah, no, I think, look, we've got a period of time that is unprecedented growth in the defense space. We have startups every day that are starting, just beginning that journey. Most of them will not win, right? They will, because dealing with the government takes a very long time for a large program. And VCs do not want to fund non-recurring revenue, right? So you have to have that recurring revenue base to get there. But let's just take the robotic industry, for example, and the autonomy. There's a lot of robotic companies right now. There's a lot of autonomy companies, really good ones. But eventually the government has to choose. And when that choice is made, if you're not providing autonomy to Tesla or the Army, what's your customer base? Right? So we'll have lots of autonomy and robotic companies that will neck down, and we'll probably have the same situation that we have where BAE and GD are really the large vehicle providers. Now we've got American Rheinmetall coming into that space. I don't know what happens once the decision is made on the Bradley replacement. If right now GD and Rheinmetall are left, well, if Rheinmetall doesn't get that contract, what happens to American Rheinmetall? Hopefully they pivot and continue to employ Americans and work through the problem sets that we have. But there's danger there.
You're I believe that you serve in a board or an advisory capacity at Kodiak. You could be wrong about that, or maybe that was previous. I think it's current, but yeah. So I knew many of the early team members at Kodiak. Don, we're not friends, but Don and I have met each other. We know each other, and I knew a number of the kind of first, second engineering hires over there. They're obviously now a publicly traded entity called Kodiak AI, previously Kodiak Robotics. Do you see companies like that are making significant plays in the private sector ecosystem? And I believe they're all about unmanned logistics vehicles and like long haul transport type stuff. And again, I could be wrong about that. Do you see technology companies like that eventually being pulled into interesting or meaningful defense or national security postures with some of their products or capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm with the company, right? I mean, because there is a defense play and we really need it. When you start talking, are we prepared logistically? The amount of supplies and other things that we have to move on the battlefield is going to be a constant convoy of trucks. And if you can do that without humans in it, reducing that risk, and then it's 24/7, then that is absolutely needed, and that's exactly where people within the armed forces, it's not just the Army, but within the armed forces are looking at Kodiak and others to fill that void. And what Don and the team there at Kodiak have done so well is they're in the Permian Basin. They've got millions of miles of long haul trucking across the southern United States. So they have a two-pronged approach. Generally you want the credibility and the early adoption of the federal and SLED, but the scale and the total addressable market on the private side is really where you're going to make your money.
Absolutely, and that's where the innovation is happening at speed too, right? And I'm not saying that true innovation isn't happening, within the halls of government buildings or within the defense kind of legacy defense prime contractor space, but the most cutting edge stuff truly is happening in the private sector, where things are being not just tested in operating environments, but actually deployed right into the economy. And you get so many reps there, and there's such a motivation to move fast, right? And break things, as they say, on the way to delivering capability faster than I think the government has typically or traditionally been able to. And Kodiak isn't alone in kind of ground autonomy stuff in the private sector, and not even alone in the national security space. We know the folks at Overland and Forterra and some of these other ground maneuver, ground robotics outfits. And then here in Bozeman, there's a major facility with the company Aurora, which deploys a range of software and hardware enabled software capabilities in the ground autonomy space. It's an area that is very interesting. What is what do you see as like the fielding pathway? Like, are we going to see actual autonomous ground vehicles fielded alongside other ground maneuver forces, the infantry, in the near future? Or is that a generational thing? Are we not going to see that for a while?
No, I think we'll see it. We had the Robotic Combat Vehicle program, which was awarded. We had a winner, and the decision was made to reattack that vector. So we were like at the goal line and fell backwards because of cost. Right? These were expensive. Autonomy is expensive, and you can save money if you're willing to eat more risk. So if I don't care that it drives on roads and that it's been thoroughly tested, so it's not going to hurt one of my own soldiers, etc., you can put in an autonomy package and let it go. I think we'll see these in some form, probably starting with breaching assets. It would be my guess. If I had to advise the Army today, if someone cared about my opinion, I would say go with your artillery. It's the simplest thing to automate, because you know how artillery moves. I mean, they park in a lazy W, they get in a line, and they drive somewhere, and then they park in a lazy W, right? I mean, you could automate that very simply. I don't know that we're going to have that luxury in the future to have all our guns together. I think we're going to need to have much smaller PAAs with 2 or 3 guns, so that then you converge those fires just for protection. But that's where I would start. And what in props to the Army, they've put a general officer in charge of autonomy. Like when I had it, I had a lot of different things going on. Now they have a general officer that's clearly focused on autonomy. They have a general officer clearly focused on counter drone. So putting your money where your mouth is counts.
I totally agree, and I'm eager for seeing tests and experimentation events where you have something like the CCA, a dynamic that Dave was describing for aviation assets, play out in the ground maneuver space with the RCV, I think 3-tiered system. That's going to be quite interesting. Dave, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and the one that I think you were alluding to earlier, Ross, when we were talking about General Dynamics land systems and American Rheinmetall, that's the XM30. I assume the optionally manned vehicle you were talking, which I think is still on track to deliver something that looks like prototypes probably pretty soon.
Yeah, this year.
But if we can switch over from sort of the like tactics and preparedness to the sort of buying behaviors, or like, back to what Dave cares about on this, which is, doing business with the Department of Defense or the Department of War. For an exquisite, you have procured exquisite systems or invested in exquisite systems like the XM30. They're delivering this complete prototype of, a complicated system. And you talked about, you can see all these startups, a handful of which have a great idea, a new material for lighter armor, better optical train, whatever that widget is, that's just a component of that complete system. For those of us that are in the small, startup or small, facing the Department of War as our customer, how did you all think about managing those programs to make sure that you had those best in class components of the complete system? Because from an outsider's perspective, it seems like the prime, although the answer may be the prime is going to select the best subcontractor, they don't always seem incentivized to do so, to share the work.
Yeah, primes are all different. Some primes have a solution that a small will also try to meet, and it's cultural. So some of the primes, like, we want best in breed. We don't care if we make it or not. But the way you influence that from the government side is your requirements. Because I don't want to have 20 different contracts. I want that lead system integrator to do that work. And so, but if I find a specific technology that lightweights my vehicle or gives me more bang in a bullet, I just write that into a requirement. I give that to them, and then do speed dating with, the prime. Say, hey, look, you might want to talk to these companies. I know we just threw a new requirement on it. That's the way it's supposed to work, and it does. And that other thing on that when anyone's listening, that like what's going on with the Army, all this, Game of Thrones stuff. At the end of the day, there'll be someone that does requirements. There'll be someone who does contracting. There's someone that does procurement. So you can move the deck chairs anywhere you want them, figure out who those three people are, and that's who you engage with. And so that's it.
I guess that was going to be your sentiment, which is why I didn't ask you about PAE and T2Com restructuring. That makes sense.
Look, here's the thing. A lot of this is what's old is new again. And even leading into the PAEs, I feel the same way. But when I hear Ross talk about, the Bradley replacement, and, one of those folks is going to win, and hopefully they stick around, the loser sticks around and doesn't, turn into dust. We saw the same thing in the interwar period. Like, I hate to keep harping on this, but the B-25 lost. It lost its competition, and it went and it sat on a shelf, and that design had to be resurfaced later in the war, and then became one of the most famous Mitchell bomber aircrafts in the history of the American arsenal. But it was designed 5 years before it ever got selected. So like there's the real question really boils back down to that: can you continue to survive and have revenue streams that are not solely dependent on, I have to win this DoD contract or my company disappears and I have to close up all my factories? And I think it's going to be ground autonomy. I think is particularly interesting because it looks, in my mind, a lot like aviation in the interwar period. You have lots of like brand new companies who mostly have to fall under large manufacturers. North American Aviation that made the Mitchell was essentially owned by General Motors at the time, even though it was like a separate thing. So like you find a place to kind of hide, and Big Daddy keeps the doors open until you can win that big contract and then scale up. And now, you have 5 factories to produce it because we're at war. But it requires, again, some level of existential threat. I think about preparing for an Iran fight. Just go back to our earliest example. Iran built the Shaheed out of need, not because they were like, what would be fun if we came up with this cheap drone, kind of this size, kind of this shape. All of those things were driven by a need, not by this ingenious savant somewhere in Iran that was like, I have an idea that will break the backs of the imperial industrial base, right? They had a need to reach out and touch folks.
Simon, when you describe need, I actually think of that in terms of a true market demand signal. So that either there was an internal kind of national security market that demanded that thing for Iran itself, but there was also a serious demand signal from Russia, right? Like the Shahid orders from Russia probably like bulked up that line, that supply chain, and that manufacturing scalability and stuff inside of Iran in a way that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise.
I think it definitely drove the scaling, right?
That's right. Yeah,
The invention of the Shahid, though, like that,
totally.
that was an
Yeah.
Iranian desire to achieve some level of military objectives.
Sure.
And they built it for their needs. And then Russia goes, man, I have that on a much larger scale. I'll buy a bunch of those, right? Like, so that was lucky happenstance, but it really is. It's a question of incentives always.
Well, and it goes back to what Ross was describing at the outset of the conversation. It actually has a lot more to do with logistics and supply chain and sustainability rather than capability. So, like, whether that is whether the Shahid drone or something else has longevity in the current or future fight, it does come down to scalability and mass manufacturability of a thing rather than something else. I found that to be pretty interesting. Okay, let's round out the conversation here with a bit of venture industry news. There, to my knowledge, haven't been any really sizable, serious defense technology venture investments announced over the past week or two, aside from the ones that we've covered on previous podcasts. But just this week, the Lockheed Ventures team announced a strategic plus up to its $400 million current investing fund in their corporate venture capital vehicle. $400 million increase to $1 billion, which I think is quite interesting. I think this is a recognition from the prime set that one of the ways that they need to remain relevant is to play earlier in the innovation world, to have a finger in or a hand in the cookie jar of what the innovative next things are going to be. And Lockheed isn't alone in deploying more and more venture capital over this kind of fraught period in the past number of years. Booz Allen Hamilton, that we're familiar with. We've had Brian McCarthy from Booz Ventures on a number of times to talk about how they're thinking about things, but they keep plussing up their venture commitments from their CVC, and I expect this trend line to continue. Simon, I think you had some thoughts or comments on like the true winners from this strange period. It may or may not be the primes. I think you have some other notions on that might touch the venture ecosystem.
But it kind of ties in together, and it's that, my topic was more centered around Kratos and AV and their stock performance in the last 5 years. And if you look at those folks, and I pulled some numbers, if you put $1,000 in AV 5 years ago, you've almost doubled your money. Same thing with Kratos. If you did it with Kratos, you more than doubled your money in just 5 years. And I think the reason that middle tier of folks has been so successful and will continue to be so successful in this innovation boom is the reason why you see folks like Lockheed doubling their investment arm, which is they're closer to the innovative edge without smothering culture, which means they're faster at snatching up folks that are inventing stuff and then scaling them.
Yep.
And
either
again,
through partnership or M&A. You're right.
Yeah, I think it always leads to M&A, if I'm being candid. I think every good partnership that I see, I'm like, ooh, how long before you just becomes, let me buy you? Because again, it's all economies of scale, right? Like there's value in partnership, but there's also a certain point where you go, I would make more money here if I owned this whole scale.
And this goes to some of Ross's earlier comments about how most venture-backed projects fail. And those that don't fail, more than likely you're going to get snapped up by a strategic acquirer, potentially not for as much money as the VCs might prefer. But that's as likely an outcome as any other from a liquidity standpoint. So
that's where Lockheed gets interesting, right?
Totally. Because this is part of that. Yeah.
Their expectation of returns is very different from a traditional VC. Same thing with Booz. Any corporate VC has a slightly different calculus than like a pure play.
It's strategic rather than financial, right? Yeah. Those are the two big blocky kind of investors. Yeah.
And I think historically Lockheed's venture arm has been looked at as trying to develop suppliers by and large to feed into a lot of different programs. But I think when you are trying to read the tea leaves of what $1 billion versus almost $500 million, I would expect Lockheed to be deploying a lot of that capital more creatively than they have in the past, right? So I don't necessarily need a new type of metal or a new type of tape. I'm going to buy a high energy weapon system IP and just whole scale buy some capabilities and do it that way, or invest in some capabilities with the long-term intention to buy.
I would also think that this increase in funding is an indication that they're looking at late stage companies, right? I mean, because pulling $1 billion,
It's very hard.
1 million at a time is horrible.
No, it's terrible. Yeah.
But, I think something you said, Simon, rings true with me is, there's a scale of innovation too. Like the large companies, if you look at the Fortune 100, Fortune 50 companies, and if you said, I think that's an innovative company, I don't think many of them are great innovators anymore. I think there are some great innovators there in the Fortune 50, but they don't have to, because you have people innovating all over, and then they can cherry pick that and say, I'll just acquire you, and now I'm innovative.
That's the destiny of bureaucracy, right? If you're going to grow, that slows by human nature.
Yeah. And I mean,
They do
R&D's
They do have scaled delivery, though, to your point, Ross. Like their value proposition in that mix is that they can scale up and deliver at scale.
Yeah, the magic is in the tension, right? Like you simultaneously need to be cultivating folks that are small and scrappy enough to want to break things, but you also need to be sustaining folks that are large enough to move the levers of industry when it's time to go to war, and not just like sustain limited engagements.
Simon, would you say that the likes of Lockheed are on the hunt for the Angine de Poitrine of the industry?
Not yet.
The vanguards?
I think
Okay.
something like that's too scary.
edgy. Too edgy.
They're on the
Yeah.
hunt for the blue halos, right?
True. That's right.
That's and this is exactly what Ross is saying about late stage, right? They want folks that are probably already in programs of record. I think that the signals are definitely leaning towards younger and smaller and newer companies landing in those mature capability contracting vehicles, if not immediately, but in the next 5 to 10, certainly increased activity. And that's who they want to buy. So they want to, and also that's who they want to help. If I can invest a serious amount of money in somebody who's past the valley of death, almost into like a serious program of record or just starting, I can guide and mentor them and then acquire once it makes sense.
I agree with all of the above. That's the way of the world right now. And I maintain a little bit of my conspiracy theory that one of the reasons for a drastic increase to the top line defense budget is so that the existing kind of legacy players don't lose market position as the rising set occupies new market positions and creates wholesale, new programs around themselves.
I think that's dangerous, though.
You think it's?
I think that's one of the most dangerous ways to approach this.
Do you think that I'm right and it is dangerous, or do you think I'm wrong and it's dangerous?
No, I think you're right to an extent.
Yeah.
As always, you guys have heard me beat this drum many times. Shipbuilding looms large. And even in this new 1.5 trillion, it is the most historic shipbuilding budget in the history of budget requests. And it eats a lot of everybody's lunch, and it does exactly zero for the innovation economy. That is not the game being played there. But I think that you really screw up market incentives if you just say, well, we'll just double the budget. Right? That does not allow anyone to feel any pain, and therefore like really dismantles the idea like, oh, we need to change the way we do business. Otherwise we're gonna be left behind. Like, no. Our friends will just double the budget.
Yeah. Too big to fail.
Too big to fail. And it's, you are putting it, and this is, I know we try to avoid going too political, but this is the politics of at least the last 20, 30, 40 years. We're going to put the pain off to the next generation. And someone eventually is going to eat all of these things at once. The massive insolvency of all these debts. That
modern monetary theory and practice, Simon, and presidential administrations of all stripes and colors, and Congresses of all stripes and colors, fear economic downturn because that is the harbinger of that's the harbinger of getting booted. We will. I think we will see. Well, let's wrap up, gentlemen. General Coffman, maybe we'll give you the final word here, and give us a grade. Preferably in the A's, A- to A+. We'll take anything in that spread.
Feel free to tell us who your favorite enlisted men on the podcast is.
Yeah, 5 out of 5 for the mustache shape, Simon. Yeah.
Now we're talking. Dave, don't smile, Dave. You hated this. The messages that I got from Dave
I still
early
hate
in
it.
the mustache.
To be clear, I still hate it.
Your mustache is disgusting. Just we're in other meetings.
It
Let
is.
me know.
If I could grow a
It is.
beard, I would grow the monkey tail. You know what the monkey tail is, Simon? You want to drive Garrett crazy. So you grow a beard, and then you trim it so it just comes down from the sideburn, goes around your chin, and here and stops.
That's awful.
That's the monkey tail.
Oh no!
Thinking
I looked it up. This is a real thing on the internet. For the record.
If you show up to our next hill visits, Simon, where we're
that's
going
the place
member
to
to
do it.
member to member, and you're rocking a monkey tail, first I'll fire you, and then I'll write some hate mail to General Coffman.
Yeah.
Look at what you've done.
It'd be
Man,
Garrett
worth
gets
it.
mad enough when I shave my head.
It'd be worth
the
it.
monkey tails in the future.
Yeah, no, I think this is a lot of fun. I like the extemporaneous discussion that really is occurring here, relevant subjects. But for anyone that's listening, we are by nature critical of ourselves. It's what makes our armed forces better than anyone else, because we will look another leader in the eye and tell them they didn't do a very good job without emotion. And so while the posturing around the world and deploying forces around the world, it is daunting, and I have 100% confidence that our fighting men and women will succeed whatever mission they give. That's without question, whether you're a logistician, aviator, or whatever. So when you deploy ground forces, that decision is so important, because you can't put it back in the bottle. And our soldiers, Marines, etc., will accomplish their mission. We just strategically have to ensure that that decision is well thought through and has a strategy behind it, namely exit strategy. And maybe love to come back sometime. We can talk about quantum or AI or anything you want.
Anytime. I don't know that any of the three of us on our side of the podcast are qualified to talk about a couple of those subjects.
I'm ready. I'm ready for quantum.
Are you, Simon? Yeah, I'm sure you are.
I'm pretty much good to go on anything.
I'm sure you are. Well, Ross, thanks for joining us this week. Dave, Simon, great conversation, and looking forward to the next one. And for everybody listening, follow us, like us, subscribe, refer your people to us. We would love to have more folks join the conversation, and then send us notes in the event that you are interested in seeing us treat any specific subjects, or if you just like Simon to wax poetic on any topic at all whatsoever, we can make that happen. So thanks everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye.